class is dedicated to Gene Rogers. And I would also like to say, because last week I was so overwhelmed by the task of introducing one of my idols, Leon Fleischer, I forgot to mention that this series is supported by Iron Show, who is not only a supporter of this series, but a supporter of the Music Academy, the Piano Fellows, and kind of everybody generally. So thank you very much. Okay, let's hear some Ravel. told now I have to sing for my supper, which is going to be a challenge with a performance that's so breathtaking. Bravo. Clearly you've played this piece before. Ravel, for those of you unfamiliar, is one of the great kind of onomatopoetic / musical composers there is, really. Him, Debussy, and others, I mean, you just hear this music and these images on the piano so incredibly vividly, and you bring out so much of that in the music already. And the other nice thing about this piece in particular is that so often in lessons and master classes, et cetera, teachers are often asking students, give me some words to describe this music, or give me a phrase or an adjective to describe this phrase. And with this piece, that has actually been taken care of for us because these are all based on poems by an amazing French poet. I'm sure you know about this poetry. For the sake of the audience, and for maybe the sake of kind of following along at home, I'm just going to read some of this poem at least. This is called Ondine. Ondine is a sort of a spiritual nymph mermaid. And the lore of this is that Ondine sort of has this siren song to mortal men to try to entice them into marriage with her. And at that point, she, a soulless creature, she's sort of this soulless wraith of a thing. When she marries a man, she then has her soul. This is obviously not so PC for 21st century, but this is the lore of it. And in this poem, Ondine has this siren's call to a man, and the man refuses her love and says, I am married and in love with a mortal woman, and Ondine is very upset with him and kind of vanishes at the very end. But the very beginning of this is so evocative that I might as well read it. There's a little snippet, not by the author, but by a poet named Charles Bruckner, and it says, I thought I heard a vague harmony enchanting my slumber, and near me spreading a murmur like songs broken by a voice sad and tender. And then the poem begins in quotation marks, Ondine speaking, of course. Listen, listen, it is I, it is Ondine, who lightly brushes with water drops the resonant diamond-shaped pane of your window, etc., etc. She has various enticing calls to this mortal man, and after 3 stanzas of this, the man, the narrator of this poem, says, after murmuring her song, she begged me to receive her ring on my finger and be an Ondine's husband, and to visit her palace with her and to become the king of the lakes. And when I told her that I loved a mortal, sullen and vexed, she shed a few tears, burst into laughter, and vanished in a sudden shower that streamed white trickles down my blue stained glass windows. So it's incredibly evocative, and none of us could describe this piece better than the poem does. So I won't ask you to do that. However, I will ask you what or how this helps us, or how does this help you in terms of your approach to this piece, which is something that, which is obvious, is one of the most treacherous pieces in all of the piano literature, and to have somebody play it so brilliantly is rare. So, yeah, I mean, you obviously know this poem. What does it do for you?
Well, coloristically, it gives me something to strive after. There are very obvious characters within both the recurring motifs and also the surrounding atmosphere. That I feel like because it follows such an obvious storyline, which is really rare, it's something that you can directly connect each phrase to. Like everything that he writes in the music is saying something.
Right. Could everybody hear that?
No.
So she had very poetic thoughts about, and rightful and totally accurate thoughts about how Ravel is very honestly following this poem, and the poem provides so much information about the musical content, about how phrases interact, the characters of individual types of music, and you know, it's a nice to have this type of thing at our disposal. So, just a couple things generally about Ravel. Well, to a different degree than Debussy, Ravel was one of the most sort of OCD, fastidious people that I think has ever been documented in the music world. Like you'll see portraits of him, and there's not a hair out of place. There's not a hair on any of his clothing, unlike mine, which is covered in dog fur. And this is reflected in the music. The music is, everything is perfectly crafted. I mean, they're not unlike the diamonds in this poetry. You know, everything is just perfectly sculpted. People often lump him with Debussy in terms of their sort of musical and aesthetic approach, but I actually think a little bit more forward and think of Ravel as this sort of proto-George Ligeti, actually. Like, they both were, maybe if you want to do the art metaphor, Debussy was to Monet as I think Ravel is to M.C. Escher, or something like that, where everything is contraptions and mechanisms, and I think there's a little bit of that in this music, despite it being, you know, so personal and evocative and sensuous. But the challenge, of course, is to have those two things operating on equal ground. Also, the you know, pianistically challenging thing about this. So, what does that all mean? I think for me, this constant 30-second note that is, save for a few unbelievably poignant moments, is constant. There are 30-second notes basically throughout the piece. It sort of sets up this rhythmic, metric grid that is completely incessant. And then, obviously, and then underneath that, you have the Ondine. So one is asking for flexibility, and the other is, you know, sort of begging you not to take too much time because then you'll lose it. And this delicate balancing act, I mean, it's like, you know, a really well-calibrated Swiss watch or something like that. This incredible relationship between something so flexible and something so mechanistic, I think, is at the heart not only of this piece, but in Ravel's music kind of generally. So that's maybe a good starting point. And let's go from there and see if some of that could just hang in the balance a little bit more delicately. Maybe from the beginning? That's amazing. This is sort of a notorious spot for pianists because the right hand is, especially to just come in cold, it's part of the reason why I wanted you to go first, because playing this last would be a very cruel thing of me to do. But the marking is triple pianissimo, and you're playing 3 notes versus 1 note in the pinky of the right hand. So you have to control 3 notes, play them triple pianissimo, and have these repetitions that should feel like little, you know, like spittle of water or something like that. And there's something about the harmony, too, that I think you're doing so sensitively, but it's nice to just kind of have this image in your mind. We have that, sort of the key of the piece, C sharp major, and on top of it, we have this foreign note of A natural, which if we're in C sharp major would be an A sharp. It's this incredibly emotional and expressive interval, but at the same time it's all triple pianissimo. And so if there's a way to, even more precisely than you're already doing, just, it's like these little machines that are all happening, just these, you know. Yeah, for me, I think the quality that I'm kind of looking for is best achieved when we hear the repetition of the G sharp. So. Yeah. Right. It's so mind-bendingly difficult, but it sounds beautiful. You sort of self-corrected, and I think you were right. Sort of thinking of that without a bar line, but it's sort of riding the tide, and you sort of find yourself at a slightly higher dynamic, but it's not because of an affect. Yeah, so to place that, the upbeat E sharp has to be slightly more defined. So that is a distinct color. Beautiful. Nice. I wonder if these two bars, it's the first time that we've had a double octave, and then the right hand sort of spazzes out a little bit. And I wonder if our spider senses can just be awakened just one more degree. This is such a slow burn movement, but I wonder if when the right hand starts going between these octaves, if we're slightly more awake. Maybe just 2 bars before from the. Don't slow down. Exactly. To there. That's fantastic. I think with that increased activity, then when it comes back to triple pianissimo, then it's like, okay, that's something special has happened. Just as an example of Ravel being an OCD person, up till now, all of the rhythm has been in some form of duple, so a group of 2, 4, 8, etc. And at this amazing moment with, he inserts this little segment of 7s and 6s, and I think this is not meant to be suddenly a moment of being out of time for the sake of being out of time, but I think it's a response to to something quite not right under the water, you know what I mean? Which is also to say that it should be exactly in time. Okay. All of the content is inherent in the rhythm of that moment anyway. So if would you mind doing 2 bars before there? Exactly. And one further idea is that when it snaps back onto the grid of the 32nd note, maybe there's also no time. But 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 1. Exactly. plea becomes slightly more agitated. Octaves. Yeah, great. So we're in a slightly different key. We're in the sort of dominant of this for the phrase 2. And the 3 verses of her poem become, as I said, slightly more agitated the further along she gets. And I feel like, again, this is a level of heightened sensitivity. Like, you know, our spider sense has to, again, be elevated a little bit. So this, it can't sound the same as before. There's, I don't know, it's informed by a slightly surfacing urgency a little bit. And I think that also has to be reflected in, I mean, you know, I say this with a grain of salt because it sounds amazing, but if this can always be, more top in the right hand here. Now flush out the bass. Same here. Exactly. That sound is, that's amazing. This is one of my favorite parts of this movement because it's so, it's like the fusion of these 2 grids of 6 versus 8. Yes, that's fantastic. This was, and this is sort of the beginning of a large build, but each time that the bass enters, I mean, I kind of wish that, you know, we were playing those Bosendorfers in the other room because you could play, you know, 3 octaves below or whatever, but there's something about the I mean, it's the lowest point in the piece so far. I mean, there's very little bass, you know, material so far in this piece anyway. And I think when it comes in, you know, this is like when things are getting dire. And it's all about the setup, of course. Yeah, now can I have that effect, but not too loud? You might voice slightly, because I'm missing a little bit of E. Almost like the first note is harmonic in its function, and then the melody emerges. Yes. You did it so beautifully that time, but I wonder in this exchange where there's this sort of menacing bass melody, that always sort of evaporates into. We've sort of talked about this in other music that you've played, but having there be no overlap between the character of those two things. I mean, it's very much what you were describing in the beginning about how so much of the poetry is has a sort of characterization to it. And I wonder if your characters can be a little bit more, like they have boundaries, you know? So we have this, and then it's immediately this different psychology of this melody. Totally different. Yes, great. That's the type of, that's the sound. But make sure that you're really going to the next part. So maybe this mezzo forte has a little bit of a cap in it. Now slowly. That's brilliant. This is such incredible music. Just to be annoying and throw a wrench in your incredible virtuosity here, I wonder, the first time that I'm sorry, I wonder if it could still be vocal. Right now it feels, again, this is such a jerky thing of me to say, but you should see the score. It's just a flurry of complete pianistic insanity here. But it's still, I think there's still a vocal element to this. And when you do it the second phrase, when you sort of have relaxed the dynamic, then it regains that. But I wonder if it can, yeah. The A comes a little too soon. I think you actually have a little bit of time. I'm exaggerating, but it sounds, but I think it's going always to the E sharp. Beautiful. That's great. I would be careful not to fall off the grid here. I don't know if you know the Ligeti Piano Concerto at all, but the reason I brought it up is because there's this crazy movement where, kind of like this, the entire movement, as with much of his music, is based on these small units of rhythm. And it begins with... And it's just constant. But the melody, when it comes in, is... Oh, sorry. Whatever it is. I played this piece a while ago. But which is all to say that the flexibility of the melodic material is all built into its placement on this grid. So it felt a little bit like you were being slightly indulgent with the way that unfolded. But which, maybe is okay. This is such a climactic part. But definitely when you get back here and this starts coming on, then lock back into something. This is Ondine consoling herself after being rejected. Here's her song one last time. Yeah, I was wondering about that. You clearly have made a decision about it, but... I think so. Yeah, and let there be a real silence. I mean, I sort of imagine the mortal man kind of looking Ondine in the face and kind of not knowing whether to be terrified or to be sort of consoled by her understanding. But I think there's a little bit of an element of terror in that silence. Because, I mean, sort of implicit in the poem is that if he marries her, his mortal life is over. He's sort of forfeiting and dying in a sense. Like, don't be afraid to go there, you know? Not overly expressive. Making you do it. This is the Ondine being sad, but then laughing in the face of this man and fleeing off. So I think it has to be a surprise. I mean, we're in this sort of D minor-ish thing. Whatever it is. the last couple days I've been thinking about this piece a lot. It's one of my absolute favorite pieces. I would never dare to try to play it. Because I've often thought, especially Ondine, I mean, Scarbo, the last movement of this triptych, is slightly more attainable for some reason, but this movement is so incredibly elusive and so pianistically challenging that, you know, the thing that you have in your ear is very difficult to translate onto an actual thing on the piano. And as I was thinking that and then hearing Anna play it, I was like, oh, okay, that's how it is. So it's very, very brilliant. So now for something totally different. We have Micah playing Mozart, I hope. Hey, thanks. This is a hard piece. I'm going to ask you a question, but only because I know the answer is very flattering. But how old are you, Micah? 21. The mind reels. I ask because, do you know how old Mozart was when he wrote this? Yeah. Younger than you even. He was 19 years old when he wrote this piece. This is the second to last in a series of, I believe, 6 sonatas that he wrote to basically show himself off as a traveling virtuoso in Mannheim and other places. But there's incredible vitality and youthfulness in this music. And for just one instance, the final measures of this have a typical Mozartian sort of thumb on the nose. The last 4 bars are bracketed off in double bar lines, and it just says coda on top. And all it is so that's what we're up against here. For me, some of the last movement, or especially the last movement, but even in the first 2, I think some of this teeming energy that you sense in what Mozart must have been like as somebody at your age just like could not be contained. I mean, the amount of music that he'd already written by the time of 19 is insane. I mean, he must have been sort of borderline in his work ethic and just what he was able to produce. I mean, this music just kind of came out of him as sort of this divine inspiration. It's really remarkable. But there's an energy about the music that sometimes I think in your approach to this music, you're a little bit apologetic about. Occasionally will sort of round off the corners of things that I think are butting against each other in the most like aggressive and sort of snide way possible. Some of that has to do with character, some of it has to do with rhythm and pulse, and I think some of it has to do with maybe taking a magnifying glass to what exactly is in the score to suggest one thing or another. And this is something we've sort of talked about, and I can say this, but I don't know if you heard Micah play the Franck Quintet or the Prelude, Chorale, and Fugue recently. I mean, sorry to make you blush, but it's ideal performance. I mean, I don't think I would want to listen to anybody else play that. I mean, it was so spectacular. And I think part of the success of that performance is that you have incredible musical instincts. Your sense of how sound develops from this point and from the keyboard out into the audience and how to blend that is totally sensational and spectacular. However, there's something in Mozart's music that is a little bit like we were talking about in the Ravel, a little bit more fastidious, a little bit more manic in its attention to detail and its uncompromising strive for what the musical truth is of a particular passage or another particular passage. I guess another way of saying it is that, as remarkable as your musical instincts and technical gifts are, sometimes instincts are not quite enough in this music. It has to be, of course, that's part of it, but it has to be tethered to some other thing, some other truth. And I think, at least for Mozart, and not all music is like this, but for this piece and for lots of Mozart's music, Beethoven, Schubert, Chopin, Liszt to some degree, well, to a high degree, of course, there's something inherent in the score itself that suggests a musical truth that we can all experience. And from there, then I think that's where the inspiration begins. That's where your keen musical instincts can take over and do the ravishing things that you do. I mean, some of the most amazing moments, and I love your playing of Mozart, is when there was a perfect marriage between your sound production and what was in the score. And those happen, for sure, but my suspicion was that sometimes they happened by accident. I can say this because you know that I admire you so much, and part of becoming the amazing artist that I think you will become is getting down to the boring, unsexy details of phrases, articulation, character change, etc. And then something really special will come to life. So I say that. Let's start from the beginning a little bit. This is, sorry to interrupt you. It's in 3/4. He wrote this when he was 19. It's 3/4. It sort of has a minuet feel about it, right? I mean, I wonder if Beethoven had it in mind when he. Same type of thing. G major also kind of. I wonder if Schubert had it in mind when he. This sort of upbeat. I don't know. They have echoes to me in this sort of generous pastoral sonority. It's also very weird, the opening phrase, right? Can you tell me about it a little bit? I mean, obviously we start with a 4-bar phrase, but then what happens? It goes off the rails, right? Normally, we would think, beautiful, right? 4 bars, 4 bars, 4 bars. But what does Mozart do? He adds this, I mean, there's something brimming to the point of like, I just can't keep this in anymore. I'm just gonna go off and play this thing. So we have 4 bars that deviates into this 2-bar virtuoso thing that then comes back. You know? So there's that, you know? Let's see if what happens. Nice. Felt a little straitjacketed, you know, like I guess I can't quite do it. But one of the reasons that I think it's maybe a little bit more hyperactive is when we're in 3, you know, 2, 3, 1. There's all that 3-ness and the sort of swing of 3. But this bar, that comes on 3, the bass note. So it actually is, so 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2. So everything is against the grain of the meter. It almost feels like a bar of 3/2 is just like inserted into this, which is, it's odd for classical music to have this type of obvious hemiola. And I mean, you would expect it in Brahms maybe, but Mozart is a little bit weird. So I wonder if you can just make it weird. Nice. What about a little bit of, just sort of ride the tide a little bit. Yeah, I mean, I know it's in you because there's a lot of music that you ride the waves on in this, but I feel like where you really need it is when you were very just, you know, sort of like, but I think this is a little hairier, maybe. Okay, let's talk about one other thing. There's obvious correspondence between all this stuff, right? We have 3, 1, 3, 1, but it's not not that, it's bum ba dum, ya da dum. So it's this dotted feeling, and then this sort of more placid sort of resolution. Da da da. I think another way of saying this is that there are core musical ingredients to this and all of music that with Mozart it's especially important to know what those are. A dotted rhythm is different than, obviously you know this, for the folks following along at home. A dotted rhythm, just inherently, its musical content is different than a quarter note. And it suggests a different thing, like just as 16th notes suggest a different type of character. These are like abstract elements that suggest non-abstract responses, in other words. And I wonder if you can respond a little bit to the exact things that are in the music. So the difference between a dotted rhythm. Yeah, why not? I think it maybe goes to the A. Yeah, but to the A, not to the F sharp. One, two, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2. That's beautiful. This, will never be played better. It's brilliant. It sort of has an echo of what we were talking about, because the phrase goes on it overstays its welcome a little bit. It sort of can't contain its energy a little bit, which I liked in what you brought out. That's great. Okay, let's play the second phrase. Nice. So, riding the wave of this theme. To you, what is the musical difference? Like, what would you do differently if the music were written rather than? What's the inherent difference between those? Not maybe secondarily how it makes you feel, but what is the obvious difference between those? Right, he said a syncopation, which is exactly right. Syncopation being what happens off the beat. So everything, instead of 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, is there's a sort of bumpiness about it, but also a beauty about it. But the point being that those two things are not the same. And yours felt a little bit like the F sharp was an upbeat into a downbeat. So, I wonder if you can, what it requires is for you to think slightly unmusically, because you have to bring out the moving note in the left hand. So, but what that does is that it calibrates our ear into realizing that what's going on in the right hand is not what we think it is. You want to try it? Exactly. The other nice thing about that is that the ship rights itself when it goes in. And that only makes sense if our ear is confused before, and then it's unconfused in the third bar. You know what I mean? Beautiful. You took care of so many of the things that I was tempted to say. But that's brilliant. The thing that I was sort of egging you on to do was to have as much rhythmic energy in when you're not playing than as when you do when you are playing. So the left hand is not, I mean, that's sort of this amorphous rhythm, but I think the specificity of the release is as important as the activation of the note. So it's, I mean, so much music happens when we're not playing. And to sort of check out for that beat and just like, and it's maybe not as exciting as checking in for that beat. That was great. Can we do once more from there? And when we get to this syncopation section, again, I would actually pay attention a little bit more to the non-syncopated line so that the syncopated line sounds what it is. 1, 2, 3, 1. Do you know what I mean? How about from 1, 2, off, off, off. Yeah, so one idea is that instead of having the trill resolve there, I think maybe sort of if you think subito piano and place the downbeat, then we'll be aligned. So one way to practice this would be put a big gap between it. Exactly, now narrow the gap a little bit, but still have a little bit of air between it. Boom, da, 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 da. Beautiful. That is already cooking. I have one other idea for you, and this goes back to our manic image of Mozart in this. Yours, this is... It sounds a little bit like it's straight 16th notes rather than... And... It still sounds that way. I mean, it's... Yeah, exactly. I think it's as much in the way that you present as it is in the sound, but really feeling like, and maybe the 16th notes can slightly go to the offbeat. Yes. Go on. Don't lose time. Beautiful. This is like one of the weirdest development sections ever. It's only 19 bars long. There's not really any development of anything. It just sort of does this new melody, and it's in this very odd metric placement. So this is actually 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. So everything is, it's like, dancing with somebody that has, I was going to say one leg, but that's inappropriate. But you know what I mean? One reason, or one way of making that apparent is not letting your rhythmic guard down over the bar line. So if it's 1, 1, 2, 3, 1, you sort of have to clue us in a little bit that something's not correct. And by playing this as an upbeat, so I think is not weird enough. It's a little bit of one, and then when it reveals its secret, that's when we feel like we're smart in the audience. Let's do it. Maybe actually, could you do from 2, 3, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, Amazing. Okay, obviously we can't go through this whole thing, but I was curious if you could just play the first phrase of the second movement. Go on a little bit. There's so much of this that I absolutely adore that you do. And actually, the thing that I like most about it is the thing I want to fuss with, which is that it's lyrical to the point of being slightly out of character for the style. So without messing with what you are doing so beautifully, I wonder if and maybe we can work on this later, but in your analysis of this, in the analysis of this sort of micro gesture that's so important to the expressivity of this music, if you can bridge the gap a little bit, maybe not 90% Schumann, 10% Mozart, but a little bit, kinder to Mozart in that proportion. Even in the beginning, maybe not, it's not quite Rossini aria quite yet. I think there's almost a Baroque element in it, which means that it's a little bit more, powdered wig. You want to try it? Yeah, the proportion of that was already better. And one last thing, and then unfortunately I have to leave you, but maybe... He goes to quite the trouble to write a 30-second note with a 30-second note rest, so it's maybe not... It's more beautiful in a way. Yeah, and why the time that... Yeah, so the second one maybe a little bit less. Exactly. It's nice when those sort of micro characters are a little bit more defined, because then when you get to some place, then go for it. And there's that vocal quality will have more of an expressive impact because it is contrasted with. Do you know what I mean? Of course. You're brilliant. Thank you. Okay, now for the piece on the program that you're probably like, what? It's amazing, especially in hands like Leonardo. So. Okay. Let the exodus commence. So I must ask you a favor, because I've been wanting to ask you this for a long time, but could you say the full title of this in your amazing...
Sonatina canonica in mi bemolle maggiore su capricci di Niccolò Paganini per pianoforte.
It's really great. So this piece, I realize it wasn't in the program, but it is in the title, that these are canons based on materials by Paganini, fellow countryman of Dalla Piccola. Dalla Piccola is an incredibly interesting composer. He's sort of the weird redheaded stepchild of the second Viennese school. Obviously, he wasn't Viennese, but he was very, very much influenced by Schoenberg, Webern, Berg, and turned that compositional language, which I think to many feels kind of this rigid, straitjacketed approach to composition, he turned that into the most beautiful, lush, harmonic music for orchestra, piano. It's really worth looking into. Especially there's an opera, I don't know if you know it, called The Prisoner, that was written in response to all of the Mussolini fascism in World War II. Incredibly dark opera. Do not recommend it if you if you're interested in only being uplifted. This is definitely going to leave you in a pit of despair, especially during this election cycle. But that aside, it's a staggeringly innovative piece, and is sort of that actually, along with his late opera Ulysses, are those two really great pieces. This piece was the last piece that he wrote before devoting himself entirely to 12-tone music. And he actually calls this piece, I was reading about him, he calls it a tonal translation. So it's not tonal per se, but it's a translation of some of the tonal elements in this music, which is why it sort of feels bizarre at times, I think. The other thing to say about it is, and something that I think we've talked about, but I think we can kind of dwell on here, is that this piece sort of hangs in a weird balance between this Lisztian tradition of taking older material. For instance, just last week you heard one of our amazing fellows, play the Don Juan Fantasy, which is taking materials of Mozart and Don Giovanni and turning it into this incredible fantasia on the piano. It has that type of extroverted bravura, but at the same time, Dalla Piccola, much like Ravel, was very meticulous. I mean, these are canons, which he's taking from Renaissance music all the way through, and they're quasi-scientific in their construction. For just one instance, the first canon is it's basically three different tempi of one different canon. Actually, maybe you can just demonstrate. Play the top line. Now play the middle voice. So you can hear that imitation. One is going at, let's see here, twice the rate as the other one. And it's in a slightly different meter too. The right hand is in 6/8, and we're sort of rehashing something that we talked about. The top line is in 6/8, which means 1, 2, 3, 2, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 2, 2, 3. And the middle canon is in 6/4, or two groups of 3/4. So 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4. But it's at such a slow rate that half of a bar of that equals one bar of the top voice. So you have a sort of 3 voices against 2 voices. And that for me is where the heart of this particular canon is the tension between feeling a group of 3 in one voice and feeling 2, and the sort of squareness of 2 in the other. And to make matters more complicated, the 2 voice also has elements of 3, but that is for another thing. I was trying to think of this as a demonstration, but actually you also probably heard Yija play the Ravel Concerto, and the middle movement of that piece is exactly the same type of thing, where the left hand is in sort of quasi 6/8, and the right hand is 2, So there's 2 in the left hand and 3 in the right hand. And for me, that's what makes that movement and this canon so unbelievably beautiful, and where like all of the harmonic tension and the sort of rhythmic anticipation makes it expressive. So I wonder if, I can make an example of you, and we can do this, again, it's sort of drifted into this, and I think it's, yeah, and it has a lot to do with the way that you place that bottom voice. So if you're thinking in eighth notes the whole time, bum, da, ya, da, da, dum, da, ya, da, da. Ba, ya, one, ba, da, ya, bo. Do, ya, da, da, yon, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Ba, da, yon, 2, 3, yon, ba, da, ya, ba. Yeah, it's a different piece, right? Like it's this amazing sort of marionette that's just sort of gliding in air. It's this incredible thing. Like all of its limbs are going at slightly different rates, It's beautiful what you do. Since we already talked about that and we're running short of time, let's go to the fireworks of this. So as I said, this is all based on material that Paganini wrote, mostly in the caprices. You probably heard some foreign objects in the last movement, particularly. It's one of the Hunt caprices that makes an appearance, and yep, which Liszt also took. So this piece is very much, in a tradition. But yeah, with all of them, it's a balancing act of being overly virtuoso and adhering to the strictness of the canon. Let's try it. Great. I mean, you can't believe how difficult this piece is. It's one of the reasons that one of the many reasons I like Leonardo so much is because he does the dirty work of learning this stuff, so the rest of us don't have to. It's really amazing what you do. What I think you're starting, and what was much better this time is, I think if you separate out the elements, the noticeable, the perceivable elements of the canon, and emphasizing them in each hand when they come in. So for me, I hear the briatata as one element, and then exactly the descending chromatic of the left hand, and then when it goes up, and then of course what we talked about, the I think if all of those things can have a conversation with each other a little bit more explicitly, then it will sound less like this chaotic virtuoso showstopper and more of the, fastidious Dalla Piccola, Try it one more time. think the registration is one thing. Bravo, by the way, that's insane. I think actually the thing that needs the most attention is not the stray notes of the registration in the left hand and in the right hand, but I think it's having a profile for the this doesn't need help, but the internal voice is the disadvantaged voice and needs a little bit of help from its friend. Yeah, I wonder if this can be a little, this is the more Lisztian moment. This is like, and then it gets crazy again. Yeah, it doesn't feel like it does what it wants to do. It feels stuck right there. Yeah, but you know, don't rush it either. Where is this? Obviously, I'm not going to play this, but everything proportional. Yeah, maybe the last. Yeah. Exactly. That's like a real jowl shake moment. Great. This one is the same. Can we do the vivace of the second movement? Amazing. The only thing that I would say is that, I mean, it's sort of, is what Mike and I were talking about, the inherent musical ingredients of this, and what that suggests about the sort of expressive impulse of something. And I think there's something different about than, which is sort of a 3/6/8 sort of thing, and so in other words, it's always coming off of a hole in the ground. You know, it's like stepping down the stairs and realizing that you had one more step and, you know, falling on your face. I mean, I think there's a and every time it happens, I mean, this is the type of discussion you have to have with yourself about making the materials apparent, because there's no point otherwise. But I think that's one area where maybe it could use a little bit more definition. You want to try it once more? Even right in the left hand, right in the beginning. Exactly. Nice. Hey, you really fixed that part. That sounds brilliant. Okay, since I'm going to be kicked off soon, and for the audience's pleasure, knowing now that this is all based on Paganini, can we just do the last page once? Bravo. I have to say thank you to you as well. This was, these are long classes, and we talk about a lot of geeky things. And it's such a pleasure to have such an attentive audience. So thank you very much.